College football playoff bubble teams. Let's run them down right here at the Voice of College Football. Please like the video, share the videos out on social media. Not everyone knows that we're here talking college football with you each and every day. Please subscribe. Hit that bell for the notifications to know when we go live, which is constantly. We're sizing up 10 teams in their college football playoff resumes. Either 10 teams that currently have a loss or will have a probable loss. We will explain. We're leaving out such teams as Georgia because Georgia is most likely a college football playoff shoo-in unless catastrophe hits, much like the 2021 edition that was so dominant during the regular season that even an SEC championship game lost by 17 points still ushered them into the playoff. Georgia's safe. Let's look at the 10 bubble teams that are either on the bubble currently or because of a possible or probable late season loss could be on the bubble with one loss. Let's start in the ACC with, Clemson is still in the playoff chase. They damaged their playoff possibilities, of course, at South Bend, losing to Notre Dame by 21 points. Notre Dame's a decent team, but they've got a couple bad losses themselves. But Notre Dame playing much better in recent weeks at 6-3. So Clemson is rooting for Notre Dame to win the rest of their games, beat USC, and look much better at 9-3. Clemson's best wins: North Carolina State 7-2. Then a pack of 6-3 teams at Florida State, Wake, and Syracuse. Those were all pretty close games, although Clemson dominated NC State in the second half. Clemson's schedule is better than you think. The teams that they've played in the Power 5 are 36-27, and the one Group of 5 team, Louisiana Tech, 3-6. This is what's upcoming for Clemson. It's not daunting, but it's consistently difficult. There are some challenges here. Louisville comes in as a hot team with 4 consecutive wins. Then Clemson plays a disaster in Miami. They've got South Carolina's 6-3 football team in the rivalry game at the end of the season at home. And then for all of this to work in the best possible scenario, so we could play out all sorts of different scenarios, but we're playing out the most probable scenarios, or we would be here for about 12 hours. Clemson, North Carolina in the ACC championship game is what we are looking at here. If North Carolina continues to win and they're an undefeated ACC team with only one overall loss, that's the best scenario for Clemson, of course, to beat an 11-1 North Carolina team. So the stretch drive for Clemson currently is a composite 24-12 collection of football teams right there. How about North Carolina? Drake May is tearing it up, so are the Heels, but they played a weak schedule. Their schedule is backloaded. They've got most of the challenges coming up, starting with Wake this weekend. UNC is 8-1. They lost to Notre Dame by 13. It wasn't that close. So, of course, Notre Dame is basically the ACC champion with wins over Clemson, North Carolina, and Syracuse. North Carolina's best win, this is not a joke, it's Duke by 3 points. The Blue Devils are a solid football team at 6-3, probably roughly a top 30 to 35 team in the nation. UNC also beat Pitt. So the schedule has been paper thin for North Carolina. The Power 5 teams that they played are 26-28. They played a couple of Group of 5 teams that are 9-9. All right, this is the backstretch for UNC. Wake Forest, Georgia Tech, NC State, the rivalry game, and then, of course, the ACC championship game against what North Carolina would hope to be an 11-1 Clemson team. The teams down the stretch that the Heels play are also 24-12. We will talk more about North Carolina as we size up all the teams. Let's head out to the Pac-12. USC's 8-1. Their one loss excruciatingly close. 2-point conversion on the road. Tough place to play at Utah, 43-42. Marginal officiating in that game, but that is USC's loss. It's a decent loss. Weak wins for USC. They've not played really anybody. Oregon State on the road, 17-14. That's the best win. Washington State's the second best win. USC has a string of close wins against bad teams like Arizona, Arizona State, and Cal. Their composite opponent's record is 30-38. They played a couple Group of 5 teams in Rice and Fresno, who were both 5-4. Colorado coming up on Friday night. Then look at this stretch for the Trojans. At UCLA, that's at the Rose Bowl, of course. Notre Dame, and then the winner of Oregon and Utah. That's a composite 23-13 schedule, and that's obviously weighed down by the Buffs' awful 1-8 record. So the three teams that USC plays at the conclusion here are currently 22-5. USC schedule ramps up UCLA, Notre Dame, in a Pac-12 championship game if they are to remain in this scenario. Let's look at their crosstown rival, UCLA. The Bruins are 8-1. They lost to Oregon on the road 45-30. Their two big wins are against Utah. Nice win for the Bruins right there. And also Washington. The Huskies are now 7-2 as well. Total record for UCLA's opponents may surprise some people because the non-conference was so bad, but the Power 5 teams that UCLA have played much better than USC at 29-25. The two Group of 5 teams, South Alabama and also Bowling Green, come in a decent 12-6. Stretch drive for UCLA. Arizona, USC, of course, that's the game that's going to decide a Pac-12 championship game berth. Cal, and then the Pac-12 championship game itself. And again, the only reason to include the Pac-12 championship game is if these teams lose before that, then they're out anyway. 22-14 is the record that UCLA will face coming down the stretch as those teams currently stand. But of course, the non-conference play for UCLA was deplorable. Bowling Green, Alabama State, and South Alabama. UCLA needed to play somebody to beef up their resume. Now on to Oregon. Ducks are 8-1. They lost to Georgia. Does anybody remember that game? Does that ever get talked about? Yeah, 49-3. Beat UCLA by 15, beat Washington State by 3. Otherwise, the Ducks' resume is pretty thin, but this is pretty much a common theme for the most part, that most teams at this stage in the season don't really have a long list of quality wins. It's usually 2 or 3, maybe. Total record for Oregon's opponents are 35-37. Look at this stretch drive for the Ducks. This would solidify, to a certain extent, an argument for a college football playoff appearance as a Pac-12 champion. 7-2 Washington, 7-2 Utah, a game at Oregon State. The Beavs are 6-3, and then a USC-UCLA winner that the Ducks hope comes in at 11-1. That's a 28-8 finale for the Ducks. That's got to be the toughest stretch drive of games for anybody in the country. Again, Washington, Utah, Oregon State on the road, and either USC or UCLA. Now let's move on to the darlings of the Big 12 and the darlings of college football. Or maybe if you would rather see the teams that are more talented and have the better recruiting rankings, you want them out of the way. TCU's 9-0, and they continue to scrape by each and every week. Their best wins, it's a pretty good stack of teams. Kansas State, Kansas, Oklahoma State, Oklahoma. 3-6-3 teams. The Sooners are 5-4. Big 12 depth means that TCU has not played any bad teams in conference. The out-of-conference schedule is bad. Total record for TCU's opponents are 31-32 currently. They played one Group of 5 team that is 5-4. That's SMU. All right, the big game coming up this weekend, of course, at Texas. Then a Baylor team on the road as well at 6-3 before they conclude with Iowa State in the regular season. What TCU wants here is for Kansas State to run the table, win their final 3 games to finish at 9-3. That's the best opponent that TCU could face in the conference championship game. Oklahoma State could also be 9-3, but of course, the Cowboys not looking good with recent blowout losses against Kansas and against Kansas State, of course. So Kansas State is the best opponent for TCU to root for to make it to the Big 12 championship game. All right, let's move on to the SEC. And yes, Tennessee. Tennessee will most likely not play in the SEC championship game. They may have the best resume in college football. However, let's look at the wins and losses. 8-1. Of course, they're coming off the loss to Georgia. It's a much better loss than Oregon's loss. However, they still got manhandled in that game by a couple touchdowns, and it wasn't that close. But look at the wins for Tennessee. Beat LSU by 27. Beat Bama. Beat Kentucky, Florida, and Pitt on the road. 5 quality teams, especially at the top with the LSU Tigers and the Crimson Tide. Total record for Tennessee. Look at this. This is incredible compared to the other teams. The total record for Tennessee's opponents is 39-15 in the Power 5. The 2 Group of 5 teams, who cares? Akron and Ball State, 6-14. Tennessee's going to beat Group of 5 teams anyway. Coming down the stretch, the schedule lightens with Mizzou, South Carolina, and Vandy. No SEC championship game for Tennessee unless Georgia loses twice. So the 3 final teams that Tennessee plays will weight down the schedule. They've front-loaded the schedule there at Tennessee. And the Vols, of course, at 8-1 would be an 11-1 team with those impressive wins against LSU and against Bama. Let's look at Ole Miss. The Rebels discarded at this point. They've got to prove themselves. They have yet to play the tougher teams on their schedule at 8-1. The loss was to LSU by 25 points. Not a good loss in regards to point differential. Ole Miss actually led that game 17-3 and lost by 25 points. Really, their only substantial win is one that they skated by at the end. They almost gave up the game-winning touchdown. It was negated by penalty. They beat Kentucky by 3 at home, and really everybody else is okay. A lot of supposed to be good teams like Auburn and Mizzou and Texas A&M. Down the stretch, though, Bama is going to solidify and confirm this team as a college football playoff contender. Win against Bama, and Ole Miss is going to be taken seriously. Then they go to Arkansas, and they've got the Egg Bowl game against a 6-3 Mississippi State team. So the final 3 teams on Ole Miss's schedule are currently 18-9. Ohio State and Michigan. Why are we bringing those 2 teams into the bubble discussion? Well, we're not taking into consideration the winner of the game because they're going to go to the college football playoff unless craziness happens. They lose a Big Ten championship game to the likes of Minnesota, Purdue, Iowa, Wisconsin, or Illinois, or somebody loses like Ohio State to Maryland. Push that aside. The winner of the Ohio State-Michigan game is going to the playoff. But how about the loser? Ohio State's resume starts with, of course, Penn State, Notre Dame, Iowa, Wisconsin, all quality wins. If you haven't noticed recently, the Hawkeyes and the Badgers playing much better football, and the Buckeyes were dominant against most of those teams, Penn State and Notre Dame, in the fourth quarter. Total record for Buckeye opponents, 32-31, 9-10 for the 2 Group of 5 teams, Arkansas State and Toledo. Down the stretch, couple games the Buckeyes should breeze through, Indiana and Maryland, then Michigan. Okay, but we're talking about Ohio State being on the bubble because they would lose to Michigan. Same thing for the Wolverines. Let's check out Michigan and, of course, that deplorable non-conference schedule, but what does it look like when you add in the Big Ten? Michigan's best wins. Like Ohio State, it's a Penn State win, but the Wolverines more impressive in that one, winning by 24. They beat Iowa by 13. They beat Maryland by a touchdown. Total record for Michigan's Power 5 opponents, 29-25. The Group of 5 teams that they played at the beginning of the season are currently 9-20. Nebraska comes to the big house this week. We've got also Illinois, a difficult game for Michigan, and that's going to beef up the resume, and of course Ohio State. But we're assuming, again, for Michigan to be a bubble team, they lose in Columbus against Ohio State. And obviously that game's going to be a close, competitive game for the Wolverines to have a chance in a bid for the college football playoff. Right now, these are the resumes as they stack up right now, 1 through 10. Tennessee, number 1, no question, not even close. Then we go with the 3 undefeated teams. So we didn't really need to sort through the opponent's record, the schedule, anything like that, because these 3 teams were ranking so close to the other ones, but they've won all their games. TCU number 2, Ohio State 3 with the Notre Dame game, and Michigan at 4. Then comes Clemson. They've won the best games against the best opponents, even though they haven't necessarily been impressive. Florida State, NC State, Syracuse, and Wake. Oregon's at number 6 with a win over UCLA. The Bruins at 7. Ole Miss at 8. USC, they've got a backloaded schedule. That's all there is to it. The Pac-12 is just backloaded all over, which is a good thing for their playoff push for one team if they can make it all the way through. And it's not even close. North Carolina has the worst credentials thus far. But let's go to the finish line. Let's add in what probably would happen or what needs to happen for these 10 teams to still be in competition for a playoff. So we add in the scenario that each team needs to be a candidate at the end of the year, whether that's a conference championship game or at the end of the regular season. And this is what the resume list looks like 1 through 10 at the end of the season. It's still Tennessee number 1. They've got the best resume. Oregon would vault to 2 because look at their final 4 games. Ridiculous. USC vaults up the charts with UCLA and Notre Dame and then the Pac-12 championship game. Ole Miss has Bama and Mississippi State coming up. Then TCU drops down a bit, even though they play some quality teams in Texas, Baylor, and a Big 12 championship game. Then we've got Clemson. Actually, their schedule fairly difficult with decent teams like South Carolina, Louisville, and North Carolina in an ACC championship game. Ohio State, Michigan are the 2 caveats here because we're talking about non-champions and we're talking about the head-to-head there, but that's how they stand. And Ohio State's schedule clearly has a 1 metric lead, 1 data point over Michigan, and that's Notre Dame in non-conference play. And even though the North Carolina Tar Heels play a much more difficult stretch drive with Wake, NC State, and a ACC championship game, it still does not compare to the rest with the likes of App State and Florida A&M and Georgia State as a non-conference schedule for North Carolina, in addition to the blowout loss at home against Notre Dame. Your comments below right here at the Voice of College Football. We have sized up the resumes of the 10 bubble teams or would-be bubble teams. Please like the video, share the videos out on social media, subscribe right here at the Voice of College Football, and we will talk to you soon.